Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for the Expanse Season 3, Episode 8, It Reaches Out. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of the Expanse, so I'll have to start with a spoiler warning for the Expanse up to Season 3, Episode 8. If you haven't seen up to this point, you may not want to watch this video, otherwise some things will be spoiled for you. However, this video will not contain spoilers from the novel, so if you haven't read the books, you are safe from book spoilers. However, I will have a spoiler section at the end of the video for those who have read the novels, but I will give a proper spoiler warning before doing so. So, to me, this episode, for the most part, comes off as somewhat of a slower, less interesting episode of The Expanse, like the ones you got in the middle of Season 1 and the middle of Season 2. That is until the end of the episode where things really kick in. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it wasn't interesting until the end, as Holden's interactions with Miller were intense as fuck, as well as Melba's covering up of her murder, but the episode felt mostly like it was setting the stage with a lot of character building scenes, particularly the ones on the Behemoth and the ones with Anna. But that ending was super intense. It was so well earned, built up too nicely, and so all in all, a very strong episode. So we start the episode with Anna on the Thomas Prince in a meeting with a lot of senior officers, where few see it as a provocative act from the OPA that the Belter flew into the ring, but Anna rightfully points out that it's just some random punk Belter trying to impress a girl and not at all an official act. But the others don't seem terribly moved by her argument. And this is interesting, that just as before, Anna is the voice of reason in a room of a bunch of warhawks who want any excuse for conflict. That being said, the captain seems like a level-headed man who will listen to her reason, but at the same time could be persuaded by the more hostile elements as well. Now, this may sound like I'm describing Gillis, but he seems a lot smarter and more capable than Gillis ever was. Now, some may be wondering why Anna, a pastor, is there in a meeting with senior UNN officers, but it makes sense to me as she's not just a priest, but is a VIP with close ties to the Secretary General of the UN. And although it's never officially stated, I get the impression that she is there as Avasarala's representative, so it makes sense to me that she would be included in important meetings like this one, and that her voice would carry some weight. So later we see her in the mess hall sitting at a table with what appears to be a bunch of religious leaders, as one in particular seems to be making a sanctimonious speech about the importance of the ring, while someone who doesn't seem particularly religious but is friendly with Anna quietly badmouths the speaker while drinking a Bloody Mary and a coffee at the same time. Now, both of these characters, the speaker and Anna's friend, are characters from the books, and although their names are mentioned in the cast list of this episode, their names aren't mentioned in this episode, so I won't give them away yet. And it remains to be seen if these characters will be as prominent in the show as they were in the books, or if this was just a brief cameo. If I had to guess, I would say they will be in the show more often, and you'll be seeing more of these characters in the coming episodes, but that's just my guess. Anyway, Anna spots Melba from across the room and can see how troubled she is, so follows her out of the room to ask if there's anything she can do for her, to which she replies no, but Anna is very perceptive and can see that Melba was indeed very troubled, and I do believe Anna's intentions are completely well-meaning, but little does she know who she's dealing with. So let's go ahead and move over to Melba's storyline. We first see her when she wakes up from her drug-induced, or for lack of a better term, hangover, where she sees that she killed Ren. So her first order of business is to hide the body. Now, I love the way this was played, as I thought the actress did an amazing job, as you can see a tear roll down her cheek, and you can tell how much it disturbed her that she killed this guy who was nothing but kind to her. But that doesn't stop her from doing what needs to be done, so she hides the body, which she tries to cram into a compartment only to find that it doesn't quite fit. So we see her once again trigger her implant by using her tongue, which releases the drugs that gives her super strength, which she uses to smash Ren's head until it does fit into the compartment, which was pretty freaking dark. She then cleans up the blood to cover her tracks. So, when she returns to the ship with the other mechanic, Stani, who is a bit of an asshole, he notices that Ren isn't there and that Melba has only returned with half her stuff, so he assumes this meant that they slept together and rambles on about how useless Ren is, which upsets Melba, who yells that Ren was a good man, better than anyone else she's met up there so far. And while she's flying to the ship to dock with the Thomas Prince, she can't stop thinking about Ren and how she killed him, and again a tear rolls down her cheek, and she's so distracted by this she nearly crashes the ship. Thankfully, Stani is a bit too dense to realize the deeper implications and just stocks it up to her being a bad pilot. Again, I love this scene, and I thought it was played out amazingly well, as it makes completely clear just how disturbed she was by having to kill Ren and how much she regrets it. And as I mentioned, her regret is so evident that even in a crowded room, Anna can pick it out. But apparently, even though she's deeply upset about having to kill Ren, she feels that she needed to in order to protect the secret of the bomb that she planted on the science vessel. And later we see her activate the bomb and destroy the ship shortly after a message is sent by James Holden claiming responsibility for destroying the ship. A message Holden denies sending, and we see Melba looking at the message with what I would describe as an evil smirk and a look of satisfaction. That combined with the scene in the previous episode, which was again shown in the previous on segment at the start of this episode, where Melba refers to Holden as a narcissistic asshole, makes it clear that she is responsible for sending out this fabricated message from Holden, and thus we learn that she had planted the bomb in order to frame Holden for its destruction. Now, why she did this and why she hates Holden so much and why she would go to so much trouble to ensure his downfall, well, that's not explained in the show yet, so we'll just have to wait to find that out. But I think it's apparent from this episode that she does indeed have a major grudge against Holden, because what we see her do is obviously not something she's doing out of duty or obligation, but has strong feelings about where this is definitely personal to her. So, switching back a bit, let me now get into the Behemoth storyline. The storyline felt kind of the slowest to me in this episode, as I love the interactions between drummer Ashford and Naomi that we got in the previous episode, but in this episode it seemed to drag a bit. But I suppose there were interesting character building scenes. We get a scene with drummer Ashford and Naomi talking about the UN's response to the Belter going into the ring and how they probably will blame them for that. And they're right. And later we get a scene with Ashford drinking and wanting to include drummer Naomi in his drinking as they toast to the Belter who died entering the ring. It was a nice scene. While not great, it did show that Ashford is genuinely trying to get along with drummer and Naomi, and I do believe his efforts are sincere. And I like his interactions with them, as he jokingly calls drummer an optimist after she calls doubt to whether or not humanity will be around in 50 years. And when drummer states that she doesn't know any optimists who are still alive, Ashford points out that Naomi is an optimist, and she happily states that she is in fact guilty of that. So, as I said, a nice scene that shows Ashford is indeed trying to make things work. However, this is all put to the test when Holden's message comes through claiming to have destroyed the UNN ship for the OPA has a sign that the ring belongs to the belt and not the inners. So Ashford rightfully points out that the UNN will take this message to mean that the OPA was responsible and thus will destroy the behemoth in response. So Ashford insists that they need to destroy the Rocinante themselves to prove to the UNN that they are not involved in the destruction of one of their ships. Naomi is, of course, strongly opposed to that plan and claims that the message is not from Holden and that it was fabricated. And we do know that she is right, but when she tries to convince the others to run tests to prove it, Drummer simply states that they don't have time to do that. And it turns out that she's right, as they get a message from the UNN, who are dubious about their claims that they were not involved and state that they have 1 minute to prove it. So left with no choice, Drummer gives the order to fire and destroy the Rocinante. I like how the initial missile launch failed and the ship lost power and they had to do it again. It does show what a retrofitted hodgepodge of a ship that they're working with. And Ashford's reaction was golden as well. And I also like how they had to restrain Naomi and eventually cover her mouth to silence her when Drummer decides to attack the Rocinante, because it shows her devotion to the Rocinante and also that she still is in love with James Holden. But it also shows that Naomi does know better and knows that the Rocinante is being set up. However, that being said, Ashford isn't necessarily wrong. Much like Naomi said of him in the last episode, that launching a missile at the Rocinante, regardless of Holden's guilt, was the only way to stop the UNN from destroying them. So I can't say that I disagree with Drummer's decision to order the Rocinante's destruction, even though I know that it was framed, because really in that situation, what choices did she have? So finally, let me get to the Rocinante storyline. We begin with Holden trying to convince himself that he's just seeing things when he saw Miller, but that doesn't work as Miller just appears to him again. He appears to be babbling incoherently, and when Holden tries to engage with him, it doesn't quite work at first. He starts to acquire the attention of Monica Stewart, who, like Anna, is smart enough to spot when someone is troubled and is incredibly obvious that something is bothering Holden. And these scenes with Miller appearing to Holden were effectively creepy, as Holden has no idea why he's appearing to him. So, taking it to the next step, Holden wants to find out for sure if Miller is indeed just a hallucination. So he does all sorts of tests on himself to make sure that he's fit physically, that he's fit psychologically, and he also tests for the proton molecule, and all these tests come out negative. So it's interesting that he's exploring the possibility that Miller's a hallucination, but also the possibility that he has something to do with the proton molecule, and this is definitely driving him a bit crazy. So the next time he sees Miller, he keeps talking about doors and corners. And whenever Holden asks him a direct question on why he's there, Miller just gives very cryptic answers and starts talking about old stories from when he was a cop on the series. He keeps trying to get Miller to give him a straight answer about what he's doing there, but instead Miller starts telling an old story about when he was a cop on the series dealing with a crime syndicate. Holden has no patience for this and yells at him. And then Amos walks into the room to see him basically talking to himself. Now, I must admit this was a funny scene. I found myself laughing at this, even though it's a bit of a trope that tons of TV shows have done before. It still really works, and more than that, the humorous tone doesn't at all clash with the seriousness of the scene, as you still get the seriousness of Amos has this legitimate reason to think that Holden is losing his sanity. I did like Amos's response here that he's not really good at talking to people, but he makes no judgments, and Holden's response, that's a great quality, was nice as well. It was a touching scene. And so that's what made this scene so great. It went from intense to funny to touching, but at the same time with an edge of suspenseful undertone throughout. It really works and is a showcase of the great writing and acting that this show has. Speaking of great acting, I do want to take the time to mention how great Stephen Strait is in this episode at playing someone who's slowly losing his mind or buckling from the stress. I mean, we do know that Holden isn't going insane and is in fact seeing Miller, but it's obviously putting an absurd amount of stress on him and really freaking him out, and Stephen Strait plays this so well, particularly the gradual decline in his demeanor. It is very impressive. So we also get scenes of Elio, the cameraman, wandering around where he's not supposed to be. When Amos calls him out on this, he makes up some excuse that Amos doesn't buy, and then he tries to hit on Amos again and asks if he still has a chance, which Amos says no. Now, I think it's pretty obvious that he's up to no good, and his flirting with Amos, I don't think is serious, and I don't think he's actually trying to get with Amos. I think it's just a way to distract him from his real intentions. In fact, we see him later in the episode pulling out a panel and removing something and replacing it, and later in the episode the Rocinante is sabotage. Coincidence? I think not. At any rate, Holden goes to Monica to ask her about seeing things, but when she brings up the possibility of synchrony, that gives him an idea, and he looks up the timing of when the belted went through the ring to discover it was the exact same moment that Miller appeared to him. So he freaks out and shoves Monica out of the room, even though she knows that something's wrong, but it's mainly because he wants to talk to Miller again. So he appears again, and where he says that he's just an investigator, and says that it reaches out 13 times a second. It reaches out and doesn't find anything, so it kills the investigator and recreates the investigator over and over and over again. And it's funny, the sudden shift in Holden, where he was before. He wasn't at all interested in hearing Miller's stories, but now he's totally fascinated. He tries to get Miller to finish the story he started before, but Miller doesn't even recognize Holden. It's like, have I talked to you before? So it seems that he is a product of the protomolecule. Now, he referred to himself as an investigator, and the cast list refers to this character as the investigator, which is what this incarnation of Miller was referred to in the novels. In fact, earlier in this season, I saw an episode list that referred to the title of this episode as The Investigator. However, apparently it was changed to It Reaches Out, which is a phrase that's repeated in the novels over and over and over again. In fact, I have that saying stuck in my head from listening to the audiobooks and hearing it over and over again. It reaches out, it reaches out, it reaches out. So I can't help but think of that every time I hear this episode title. But at any rate, it's interesting that when Holden asks Miller what makes him so special, Miller finally gives him a straight answer and says simply because he has a ship and he can go places. It describes Miller, or the investigator, as a hitchhiker of sorts. But just when Miller is trying to tell his story to Holden, Amos comes in and interrupts him. Holden tries to make him go away, but he won't, and this of course is because the UN ship just blew up. But it isn't until Miller actually disappears that Holden agrees to go to the bridge with Amos. And of course, the fake message that Melba puts together starts playing, but shortly before it does, they lose all control over the Rocinante, and then of course the Thomas Prince and the Behemoth start to target lock them. And while they freak out about what to do, it suddenly dawns on Holden that he needs to talk to Miller. So he runs off to be alone, because Miller only appears to him when he's alone, but Amos follows him and refuses to let him go. But I love how Holden says that they're not going to regain control of their ship, that the whole thing was a setup. It's interesting, even in his agitated state, he's able to reason out that someone set them up to be destroyed. Now, even if it's not incredibly clear that there's a virus blocking them from, even if it's not clear in this episode, there's a virus blocking them from using any sort of the vital systems like weapons or cons, which is why they don't respond to the Behemoth when the Behemoth tries to make a link with them. And then we get an absolutely great moment when Holden asks Amos how many times he's asked him to trust him, to which Amos answers none. So Holden responds by saying, trust me now. So Amos does that and leaves him alone. This was an absolutely great moment in their relationship, as Holden and Amos has always had their issues before. At the start of their journey, Amos refused to listen to Holden at all, but they've been through a lot together, and I love this moment as it shows just how close they've grown and all the things that they've been through, and this is the first time we really see these two connect, and it was touching and a really great moment. So, once left alone, Holden tries to get Miller to reappear by repeating the term doors and corners, which is the phrase that Miller kept repeating over and over again. And Miller finally reappears and repeats the same story, that the rookie enters the room too fast without checking the doors and corners. And if you enter the room too fast, Miller says, the room will eat you. Then Holden finally gets what Miller is trying to tell him, and that it's instructions for entering the ring, that they need to slow down and enter it at a slow rate. He also realizes that entering the ring is the only way of getting out of their current predicament. So he goes to the bridge, yells at Alex to go into the ring, to which he responds by saying, hell no, but he tries to convince him it's the only way. When Amos asks him, how he knows about the ring, Holden says that Miller told him. And the look on Amos's face when he says this was absolutely priceless. Holden then pleads with him, saying that he can't prove any of this, but he knows that it's the only way to save them. So Amos backs him up and tells Alex to do as Holden says. Now, it's hard to say whether or not Amos really believes Holden that he's seeing Miller, but I think he does. I think Amos puts two and two together and realizes that's why Holden kept scanning himself for the protomolecule, because Amos also knows how Miller died, or at least what happened to him after he left. So I believe he takes a leap of faith with Holden, knowing that he's never steered them wrong before. And so this entire sequence was one of the most intense sequences I've ever seen. The music was amazing. The way it intercuts between all the various locations was perfect. And the visual effects really worked, seeing the Rocinante flip towards the gate. It was all amazing. Now, the burn was enough to knock them all unconscious, but they wake up and find themselves inside the ring with the missile frozen in place beside them. So it turns out Holden was in fact right, and again the whole sequence was absolutely incredible. So my rating for It Reaches Out of 10 is a 9 excellent. A super intense episode. While although a bit slow at times, it's very effectively creepy, with Miller's mysterious and cryptic appearances to Holden, and overall the setup for the ending was absolutely perfect, as this was one of the most intense endings I've seen in any episode. The acting, the music, the cinematography, the special effects, everything was so completely top notch, reminding me of why this is currently the best show airing. So that's it for my spoiler-free section of my review of It Reaches Out. Be sure to check out my live discussion this Sunday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard U.S. Time, where I'll be joined by Darren from D's Reviews and Don Willie from A Dawn of Ice and Fire. We will go deeper into this episode and discuss everything that happened. Also, check out my channel for many more videos on The Expanse, as well as other videos on other shows like Star Trek, Game of Thrones, Babylon 5, and more, so be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching. However, for those of you who have read the novels, you can follow me to my spoiler section, which begins now. So, I was surprised to see Cortez and Tilly in the show, as we had no indication so far that they'd be in the show. In fact, I had predicted earlier that they wouldn't be in the show, but as I mentioned in my spoiler-free section, I do expect to see more of them. I'm still unsure if Cortez will play the same role as he did in the novels and team up with Ashford to try to destroy the ring. I suspect that he will, but if so, I think we should be getting a lot more scenes with him in the coming episodes to introduce him more to the audience who are unfamiliar with him. Of course, in the novels, he was the one who was on good terms with the Secretary General, but in the show, that's Anna, so that does change the dynamic a little bit. As for Tilly, I think we'll get the same storyline where she was friends with the Mals, and she will be the one to recognize Clarissa Mal. I think this is because I noticed in the scene where Anna sees Clarissa, Tilly was specifically facing away from Clarissa, so she clearly could not see her, pretty much like it was in the novels, which is why I think that Tilly will be the one to recognize her. So because of that, I think they're going to keep that aspect of her storyline. But again, if they do, I think we need to see more of her in the coming episodes. So I have a little correction to make, as in the spoiler section of my last video I mentioned that I was unsure if Bobby Draper would appear in the rest of the season because she was back on Mars, but as one of my commenters pointed out to me, she was established as being on an MCRN ship headed towards the ring. So she will in fact be nearby, and she's mentioned in a synopsis for episode 10. So she pretty much confirmation that she will be appearing later in the seasons. However, I'm starting to think that we won't see Avasarala for the rest of the season, as they do appear to be keeping the focus entirely around the ring, just as it was in the novels. So I think we won't really get her again for the rest of the season. That's just my guess. I'm also starting to think that they may indeed try to finish all of Book 3 by the end of the season at the speed that they're going. But I actually hope not, because I can't see this coming off as a little rushed, if not incredibly rushed. In fact, I kind of think these last two episodes have been moving a bit at a much faster pace than the show normally does, and the time jump was a bit jarring, but, you know, I don't know, maybe that's just me. We'll just have to see where they go with the rest of the book. Anyway, that's all I have for spoilers, so I'll see you guys next time.